Hello everyone, and welcome to a new video where I'm going to be starting a new series, Opening Comparisons. What I will be doing in this series is I will be taking two openings of similar caliber, or they come out of the same opening or whatever, and I will be comparing and contrasting them with each other over a multitude of factors. These factors include how fun they are to play, how much theory you need to know to play them, how easy they are to play, the evaluation and win rates, and how good they are for beginner, intermediate, advanced, and master level rating ranges, and even more. So in today's first sort of test episode, I will be looking at the King's Gambit, which is pawn to e4, pawn to e5, and pawn to f4, and I will be comparing that with its counterpart, the lesser-known Vienna Gambit, which is pawn to e4, pawn to e5, and instead of pawn to f4 right away, we're going to play it on the next move, after knight to c3, the Vienna game, knight to f6, and now pawn to f4. And although the only difference between them is the two knights being developed, that is actually a massive difference, which you will soon realize changes a lot of things. So let's start with how much theory is needed to actually play them. I'll start with the King's Gambit. So after e4, e5, and pawn to f4, black has a few options here. They can take the pawn, they can play pawn to d6, they can play knight c6, they can also play pawn to d5, the Falkbeer counter gambit, no I didn't say a bad word, and bishop to c5, the classical variation. These are the main options here, and that's already quite a bit. However, what's really concerning is that after they take the pawn, and now knight to f3, which is pretty much just the best move here, they have a lot of options that they can play here. They can play pawn to g5, the main line. What else do I have here? Pawn to d6, the Fischer defense. They can play knight to c6, the MacLeod defense. Bishop e7, the Cunningham defense. Pawn to d5, the modern defense. Knight to f6, the Shallop defense. And these are only a few of the options. There are still many, many more. The real concerning thing here is that for a lot of these options for black, we can't just play the same setup every single time. We need to know actually what to do, which is quite annoying. And the other concerning thing here is that these are only a few of the options. Like I show this position here that has a lot of options for black, however there are a lot of other positions where black has many options and you have to know what to do against each and every one of them. So now let's compare that to the Vienna Gambit, which is this position right here. Now they only really have three main options here, with a fourth one that's kind of bad. They can take the pawn, which is a little bit of a mistake. They can also play pawn to d6, just being really solid, and pawn to d5. These are really the only moves that black can play here, and the thing is that all three of these lines, they're pretty self-contained, meaning black really doesn't have many other options in each of them. Like, what I mean by that is, like, for example, in the pawn to d6 line, you really do not need to know any theory here. If they take the pawn, you only really need to know, like, a few moves, and the only real thing that you need to know is the pawn to d5 main line. You need to know to take the pawn, and after knight takes and queen to f3, you really just need to know some of the main ideas, and then you're totally good to go here. Overall, the Vienna Gambit, I think, has a bit less of a theory requirement to actually play this effectively, so I'm going to give this round to the Vienna Gambit. Now let's look at how actually easy they are to play. So let me go back to the King's Gambit here. So what I mean by this is this an opening where like your moves flow pretty naturally, usually you don't need to think too much, or is this one of those openings where you need to think really hard on every single move? And the opening ends up landing you in very difficult positions to play. So for the King's Gambit, it is pretty easy to play. So like after they take the pawn and knight to f3, I'll look at pawn to g5, the main line here. The ideas are really simple, and I'm sure most beginners can understand them. Like after bishop c4 and pawn to g4, we can actually just like castle here, and after takes, it's like a very easy position to play. I mean, just take this pawn, start attacking black, and you're all set. Let's look at another line, for example, the Fischer defense here. Once again, it's pretty easy. Go bishop c4, pawn to d4, try and take this pawn, and you have a very big, or not big, but like you have a lot of space, and it's a very nice and naturally flowing opening to play. Normally these openings are pretty fun and, just not that hard to actually end up playing. So now let's compare that to the Vienna Gambit here. So if they take the pawn here, then we can simply push our pawn up. Their knight has to drop back, and simply knight f3, pawn d4. This is a pretty easy position to play. They can also play pawn to d6, but I don't really need to mention this. I mean, this also is a pretty easy position to play. The problem here comes with pawn to d5, the main line. For example, let's look at the main line. So takes, now queen f3, and let's say they play pawn to f5. This is known as the Bardelabine variation. I've never learned how to pronounce that. But this position is actually quite hard to play. Like, for example, after pawn to d3, the main move, knight takes, and knight takes. And now black goes pawn to d4, like, their pawn's in the center, they're going to take this, and then we can't really, take them because now bishop comes to check, and this is not an easy position to play. If you do end up getting this position, you're really going to need to start focusing to, play very well here. And also our queen kind of gets in the way, our knight can't develop there now, and the bishop is blocked out. Unless you really know what you're doing and you're really focusing, this is going to be a pretty hard position to play. Overall, I think the King's Gambit is a little bit better on how easy they are to play, and as a result, I'm going to give this round to the King's Gambit. So next, let's look at how good they are for each of the rating ranges. So I got these stats from Lichess, since they have a little option, or a little, not option, but a little thing where you can look at how white scores at different rating ranges. And I'll tell you about the King's Gambit first. So in the King's Gambit, white does extremely well at beginner level. Like, I'm telling you, beginner level win 60% of games or something crazy. But the problem is, the higher up the rating ladder you go, the worse it gets. So while it's really good at beginner level, it's still pretty good at intermediate, but it's less. And at advanced level, it's starting to not do so great. And at master level, it's really just not that good at all. So while this may be good for beginners and intermediate players, if you're planning on climbing the rating ladder any higher than that, you're probably going to have to start finding a new opening or really trying hard in these games. Because the more black actually knows what to do here, the more you're going to start struggling in your positions. Now let's compare that to the Vienna Gambit here. So in the Vienna, at the beginner level, white still scores pretty well, but not quite as well as the King's Gambit. But what I notice here is that it kind of retains its advantage. At the intermediate level, it still scores pretty well, and at the advanced level, it still scores pretty well, better than the King's Gambit. And the only time it really equals out is all the way up at master level, at which point the King's Gambit and the Vienna Gambit are about on par with each other. Overall, I think I'm going to give this round to the Vienna Gambit, since I think being better at more advanced levels is a bit more important than being better at more beginner levels. Admittedly, though, they were still really close. So now we'll be looking at the objective evaluation and the win rate. So for this, I looked at all the rating ranges from beginner to master to get as much of a sample size as possible, also for all time controls as well, and what I found was pretty interesting. So in the King's Gambit, in this position, the evaluation is minus 0.6. I looked at this on the Stockfish engine, so it's definitely a bit better for black, but not that much. And white wins about 51% of games compared to black's 45%, so it's definitely still a pretty good opening. However, with the Vienna Gambit here, it scored shockingly well. So in this position here, the evaluation is minus 0.2, so once again, slightly better for black, but it's so extremely slight and might as well not be there, only computers can probably sense that. But the crazy thing is that white wins 55% of games, compared to black's only 40%. Which is crazy, because King's Gambit had 51% of wins, but this has 55% of wins. That's a pretty big difference. So I'm going to have to give this round to the Vienna Gambit, pretty clear-cut win there. So next, let's look at some of the common mistakes. And what I'm doing with this one is I'm going to be looking at some mistakes that black can make, how common they are, and obviously, how big of an impact they actually make. So for the Vienna Gambit, there are two main mistakes that black can make here. The first one is to take the pawn, because now we push up with e5. And the knight actually has no squares here, because queen controls these, knight controls these, so they have no squares except to go back to g8, which is just, sad. And after knight to f3, and something like knight 6, and now pawn to d4, we're going to win the pawn back, and we are just absolutely crushing here. Now let's look at the King's Gambit, or actually, there's one more trap here, or not really trap, but a common mistake that black can make, and that is, in this position here, to play knight to c6, because now we get a very similar thing. We take the pawn, black takes back, and now pawn to d4. Black moves, and now pawn to e5, we get the same thing. Black has to move their knight back to g8, and after a simple knight to f3, once again, we're crushing here, and we're not even down material. So now let's look at the King's Gambit. The King's Gambit has really only one main mistake. However, if we're being honest, that main mistake is extremely common. So after pawn to f4, let's look at if they take the pawn, and now pawn to d6, which is the Bobby Fischer defense, very, very popular. The main mistake here that black can make is letting us push to d4 and then winning this pawn back. So for example, that can look something like bishop c4 here, now knight c6 for black. This move is kind of inaccurate because now pawn to d4. And if black goes knight to f6, we can just play knight to c3, defend the pawn. And if they let us get this pawn back, like in this position here, you can see we have a ton of space and we're just absolutely crushing here. So while that is the only main mistake in the King's Gambit, it is extremely common. Overall, I think this round is going to go to the King's Gambit. Very, very close, because even though the Vienna Gambit has another trap, because Vienna Gambit, or not really traps, but two main mistakes here, they are admittedly, they're pretty common, but they're not super common. In the King's Gambit, I bet you, especially at lower rated levels, they will let you take this pawn back like 80% of games, which is almost always a mistake. So now let's look at our last factor, which is the fun factor. How fun are these openings to actually play? So first, let's look at the King's Gambit. So the King's Gambit is very, very fun to play, because after they take, knight to f3, and if they go to the main line here, pawn to g5, which is by far the most common, you can see that we can have a ton of fun, like bishop c4, pawn to g4, and now the Muzio Gambit here, which I think is the most common thing, is an unbelievable amount of fun. Like, black takes, we take back our queen, and you can see, even though the engine is not, totally keen on this, this is an unbelievably fun position to play. Like queen to f6, and I can go for the triple Muzio Gambit with sacrificing the pawn on e5, now sacrificing the bishop, now sacrificing the d4 pawn, and now bishop to e3. By the way, they can't take because of this, they're pinned. Yeah, according to the engine, engine's gonna say you're stupid, but oh my god, look at that king, look at this battery, you're about to murder this king, and this is going to be so much fun to play. And at the end of the day, chess is just a game, and if you're not having fun, then what is the point of it? And while this is the, super hyper-aggressive triple Muzio Gambit, you can see that also in, like, this, Fischer defense, if black makes that super common mistake of letting us take the pawn back, we are going to have a ton of fun in this position. Two massive center pawns, our bishops are controlling like everything. There's a possible idea of rotating our queen to e1 and then to g3 here to attack a black's king side. They're going to have a ton of fun here. Now let's look at the Vienna Gambit. So in the Vienna Gambit, I'm just going to tell you straight up, you're probably going to have less fun here. Once again, if they take, then you push to e5, yes, lots of fun, yay, yay, yay. Also, they play, knight c6, that mistake, and you're also having a lot of fun. The problem is that, first of all, if they play pawn to d6, you don't have a bad position, definitely not a bad position, but it's just not very fun if black being, protecting their center pawn, not letting us, have a lot of fun getting these super open lines, like we do in the King's Gambit. But especially as bad, though, Pawn to d5, the main line, because once again, in this position, we're definitely not having fun here. If anything, we're suffering, because, I mean, I don't know about you, but I play the Vienna sometimes. I definitely do not want this position when I play the Vienna. I mean, like I said earlier, our pieces are hard to develop, they're blocked in. Black is starting to have a lot of fun, trying to take the pawn. I mean, Black's having all the fun here, and we should be having all the fun. That's just not good. So I think this is a pretty clear-cut round. I'm going to give this one to the King's Gambit. So after comparing all of these factors, I'm about to say what my official pick is for the better opening. Keep in mind, obviously, this is subjective, and this is my own opinion. You're entitled to your own opinion as well. But in my humble opinion, I believe that the Vienna Gambit is the better opening. Even though this pawn to d5 line lets black have all the fun, most of the time, unless you're advanced levels, they're never going to know this pawn to d5 line, and taking this and making this mistake is quite common, as well as the fact that in this position, white wins 55% of games, which is massive, ridiculous in fact, compared to black's 40%, whereas in the King's Gambit, it is only 51%. So thank you so much for watching. If you want to disagree with me in the comments, please do so. I will be glad to see your comments. But yeah, thank you so much for watching, and I will see you next time.